Is it that you start by growing and therefore become profitable, or is it that you fix the profitability problem first and then have a sound basis for growth? For most organizations, it isn't necessary to be the fastest. And most organizations could do better with moderate growth than trying to conquer the whole world. Right? In crisis times, acquisition growth is, relatively speaking, more attractive than it is in booming times when there is more competition for all resources.
Welcome everyone. We are here at EODF 2025 and we're looking behind the scenes at some of the presentations. With us we've got Per Davidsson from Jönköping University in Sweden, I hope I pronounced that right, and from the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane. And we have Seb Finley from EODF as well.
Hi.
I'm Damien Bramanis. So Per, welcome very much. Welcome here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So before we get into talking about your presentation and the discussion you talked about crises and external enablement, I'd love to rewind a couple of years and tell us about what got you interested in entrepreneurship and in businesses.
Well, I had a long career in entrepreneurship. I started in the late 80s actually, and back then I was at Stockholm School of Economics, which is an elite business school in Sweden. And it struck me that there was very little about small business, new business, entrepreneurship at the time. Right? And my original interest was in small firm growth. And there was a lot of overlap between small business and entrepreneurship, even more back then than there is now. And what puzzled me was that all the theories in business, organization, economics seem to take for granted that all businesses want to grow, right? And you don't have to know many small business owner managers to realize that the prospect of growth can be a mixed blessing for them, right? So I thought, oh, that must have been done to death. But there was so little research. So that was my project for my doctoral dissertation. So that got me into it. And eventually I got into this. I considered myself an economic psychologist at the time because that was the department I was in. But I got into conferences in small business entrepreneurship, and the field of entrepreneurship started to grow. And I had entered this obscure field, and suddenly 5 years into it, I was sort of an emerging pioneer and veteran in a booming field, right? So I was very lucky that what I had entered into just out of my own curiosity. I said, this certainly is more important than the limited amount of research indicates. So it was not just about my curiosity, but anyway, that the field I entered into, or research stream I entered into, took off like crazy.
So that field, particularly around the startup industry, seems to focus a lot on rapid growth at all costs. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that spliced into what you were working on?
Yeah, so some of the research I've done has been on high growth firms, and especially on the relationship between growth and profitability. And I had this hunch that there is too much emphasis on growth as a goal itself, or the belief that you grow to become profitable. And there is a number of theories, especially in economics, that sort of suggest that. And there's sort of economies of scale, and there's first mover advantages, and there is sort of network effects and things like that, right? But so we had an empirical project where we did a simple thing. So we saw how organizations move over time in terms of the level of growth and the level of profitability. And just a simple 2 by 2, right? And we had a middle group, so we didn't pay too much attention to very small changes. Right? And basically asked the question, who is more likely to end up in the enviable position to be above average growth and above average, significantly above average growth and significantly above average profitability? Is it that you start by growing and therefore become profitable, or is it that you fix the profitability problem first and then have a sound basis for growth? And the results were quite clear that it is much more often the latter. And it's not strictly causal, but it probably indicates that if you're able to be profitable at a more modest scale, then you really have a good offering or a good internal organization. So you have fixed those business basics, right? And then you have a sound basis for growth. Unluckily, the startup ecosystem looks too much at a few big outliers that really are unusual cases of winner-takes-all markets. For most organizations, it isn't necessary to be the fastest. And most organizations could do better with moderate growth than trying to conquer the whole world, right? And this research that we did, this was back in 2009, we published. I've been lucky enough to have this replicated. First, so that was a general sample of businesses. Then it was an early replication in biotech in Finland. Repeated the results. Then there was a massive replication across all Europe, across all industries. Every analysis, every breakdown, size classes, industries, and so forth, countries, every single analysis pointed in the same direction. A rather clear preference for profit before growth rather than say. So there's sort of massive empirical evidence that for most businesses, most of the time, they should take it a bit easy with this rush into growth.
And I'm at risk of jumping to a conclusion here. That maybe by focusing on profitability, you're getting the question of resilience in place so that the growth can be tolerated and absorbed within an organization.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. We haven't looked empirically into the details of how this happens, right? But that may well be the case. I mean, my main interpretation of it is that you have sort of the fundamentals of running a business right before you start to try to conquer the world, right? Because I mean, if you start from a weak profitability basis, then you don't have a superior offering really, well, then you have to buy your growth with lower price and high marketing costs, right? So that's not going to make you more profitable, right? So, yeah.
But it can be more exciting to try and conquer the world to focus on profitability. So.
Yeah.
I love the contrarianism that here's this thing of rapid growth that just seems fantastic, and you're over here saying, well, actually, there's a really dark side to that. And it contrasts to your presentation yesterday where you talked about this horrible thing over here of big crises. And again, you're contrarian saying, well, actually, there's a bright side to a crisis situation.
Big bit contrarian may be the reason why I ended up there. So another thing of a background, I grew up in a one-company town, dominated by one large steelworks employer, right? So the contrarian in me took an interest in small and young businesses for that reason. I've reflected on that early on. And yeah, and when researchers are supposed to be neutral and fact-based, evidence-based, right? But in the early entrepreneurship research, maybe even more small business research, there was a tendency to be the small business fan club, right? And then that triggers the contrarian in me. So then you sort of look at, hey, wait a minute. And there was a British Professor Davidsson, who unfortunately is not with us anymore, who took this more balanced view, and that impressed me, so to speak. That he was a leading voice, but he had that restraint of sort of let's not overdo this, right? Yeah. So and then with societal crisis, then sort of the main tendency there is to assume that because there is a societal crisis, the company will be in crisis, right? And the fact of the matter is probably that it is less than 50% of businesses that have any major problem, and then there's a big group that are basically unaffected, right? It's business as usual. And then there is a not so small minority that actually directly benefit, and that had been very little attended to in research. I mean, you come across it from time to time in the business press, but then it's usually presented as a curiosity, individual cases, not as a systematic phenomenon that you can actually explain why it is that crises tend to foster a minority of really big successes, right? So a smaller a bigger minority of firms that benefit, and then a tiny minority of Uber, Zoom, Airbnbs, and so forth that come out of recessions or other big crises like COVID.
Yeah, and I found when you talked about that yesterday, I found that personally very empowering. The idea that there's been all of these historical crises, and you talked about the Great Depression, and you talked about the global financial crisis, you talked about COVID and many others, and each of those there were large, impressive organizations which have been born or accelerated very quickly throughout those crises. And I think that was a bit of a mindset shift hearing that it felt like, well, there will be crises in the future, and they're not necessarily situations that I'll be a victim of, but they're a situation where I or my organization, if we do the right things, they're opportunities.
Yeah, so for a minority, it will be an opportunity, right? Because if you offer something or can offer something that makes it easier to mitigate the crisis for the majority that, or the large group that is negatively affected, households and businesses, then you actually have a demand surge in the crisis. But as I explained in what really explains this phenomenon is that the same demand surge is actually, if you have the same demand surge, you're actually in some ways in a better position during a societal crisis than in normal or booming conditions, because the rest of the economy is going slow, which means that you can access resources that more cheaply or to a greater extent than you can otherwise, right? So, like, what I actually forgot to say on the supply side in the presentation was with Airbnb and Uber, which had a demand effect that people would be more willing to try those new alternatives because they were cost-saving alternatives, right? Well, even more important in their cases, it was probably that people was much more likely to put their hand up as Uber drivers, putting their car on the market, putting their unused space on the market in order to get extra income streams when other things were going tough one. And then there is so in addition to the demand effect, you have an advantage on the resource side, the input side. There is a couple of studies showing that it's easier for young, small, obscure, unknown businesses to recruit top talent when other businesses don't, right? And when you think of it, it's quite natural that is the case. There is idle machinery, there's idle facilities. The venture capital will shrink. It can shrink to half or 1/3 of what it was before, but that remaining part will be directed to those niches that actually have a demand surge in. So for them, they may actually be better off in that regard as well. And then we have the sort of those unlucky businesses that suffer badly. They can put themselves up for sale in a way that they wouldn't, and at a price that they wouldn't under better conditions. So that was something I had noted in research way back in the 90s, that high growth firms shift to much more acquisition growth during recessions, and that's probably indicative of they have been doing well in the previous good times. They have the money, and now the acquisition targets are getting cheaper, right? So that, and I think Amazon is a case of when they stopped doing the puppy dog ploy of just being an online bookstore to become a general global global retailer, online retailer. they had aggressive acquisitions, that was helped by the global financial crisis.
So when I look in the rear vision mirror, that resonates with me. I see, well, of course that makes sense, that in a crisis there are those opportunities that you mentioned, and I can see how those companies succeeded. But looking forwards to the next crisis, it's very misty. And I want to know, how do I make sure that I'm as lucky as possible when the next crisis hits? How do I keep my eyes open to the right things, or find the right opportunities to be able to be one of the minority who thrive in a crisis, rather than the majority who stay relatively the same or are negatively impacted?
But before I answer that question, I would like to, because I forgot to add the third leg of what we call the enablement triangle, right? The triad. So you get the minority that get a demand surge. They also get advantages on the supply side, but in addition to that, they also get more positive media coverage. They also get more lenient or favorable regulatory treatment from policymakers, right? So which can greatly boost those other effects so yeah, but how do you do it? Well, firstly, to have the mindset that it may not just be doom and gloom. So our business may actually be unaffected. It may be positively affected. There may be some part of our business that is actually getting an advantage from this crisis. Some startups. So one case that we were looking into was MailChimp. Which apparently, now my co-authors know the full story better than I do, but I think this was an example of a startup that this was not their main product at that stage, but this was something that was favored by the global financial crisis, when a lot of small businesses needed new marketing channels and so forth. So they pivoted to make that their main business. So that is, of course, one thing you can do. Another example was news organizations in New York in one study, which were mostly negatively affected in their main business. But there were other parts of the business that was actually favored. There was a greater interest in local news and so forth. And what they did was that they went back to projects that they had previously considered that were shelved, not necessarily because they wouldn't be profitable, but they wouldn't be as profitable as the ones that. So now that some other parts of their business didn't work during COVID, they went back to those projects and reactivated some of those. So that was an interesting observation in that study that we hadn't really thought when we developed this external enablement framework. Then somewhere okay, so what you can do, so that is being being alert to it, right? Having this and being tuned into environmental changes in general. A lot of at least the academic focus in the last few decades have been very internal, right? And in entrepreneurship research, a lot of focus on the person, the entrepreneur, the team, the organization's resources, and so forth. Very, very inward looking. Back in the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, we had Porter and other things like that. There was a lot more emphasis on external success factors. Right? So I think it's about time that the pendulum swings back in research, and I think it's about time that practitioners pay more systematic attention to external changes, right?
And I mean, arguably, that the external environment in general is more changeable now than it was.
Yeah. I mean, so that was what started to make it so absurd, that the preoccupation with the internal success factors in business research, when you have globalization, you have digital technologies, you have those COVID, you have the global financial crisis, all those you have climate change. I mean, there's major things happening, right? We also have interesting demographic changes. We have social cultural changes. There was a big trend towards veganism when we started to develop these things, and then I never thought that when back in the early 90s, the vegans locally where I lived, they were sort of militant activists who burnt down the trucks at the slaughterhouse and so forth. Right? Abattoir, we should say these days. But anyway, that this should become into the mainstream, right? But then it seems now, to me at least, that this trend has sort of abated a bit. That maybe it's too hard to be a vegan. It was mostly young people, and young people changed their ways in ways that 35 plus people don't do as readily, right? So, yeah. But you have, I mean, you had this big trend of diversity, inclusion, and so forth. All those things open up business opportunities, right? So that's I use this metaphor. I'm Australia-based now, so or the metaphor of surfing, right? So that the environment is big and powerful, and the ocean creates big waves that we can't create waves like that, but we can learn to surf the waves, right? So. And that is sort of that is a sort of basic attitude to and then we have developed this external enablement framework that we say that across those seemingly very different kinds of changes, they have some things in common, right? They have some kind of scope that can vary. It's the geographic scope. Is this something very local, or is it global, or somewhere in between? Is it across all industries, or some tiny industry niche that is affected, or something in between? Does it affect all the military veterans, or some very niche group, or anything up to every human on the planet, right? Is it a very temporary thing, or is it something that is going to be a lasting change? Also, how does it happen? Does it happen very rapidly, or does it happen gradually? All of those things have implications for how many can actually benefit from this. How much can they benefit? Who can benefit? Right? If it is of limited scope, well, that may actually be good for a small business, because the big guys will not rush in. Right? Small businesses can also be more agile, or especially young businesses can be very, very agile and act on things that happen rapidly and unpredictably. And if it is something that happens rapidly and unpredictably, that will eventually be very big. The solution will be very big. Well, you can still then, as an independent, probably lead over the big guys in the early days, but you should probably have a strategy of becoming an attractive acquisition target rather than go it alone in the long run, because you will eventually be outrun by someone with a big efficient business machine and financial muscles and so forth.
Well, yesterday you also talked about scalability, so making yourself marketable, or making sure that your solution is scalable.
And that is, I mean, we started with examples from the modern era, and then it has been a lot about digital technologies and the scalability of digital technologies and the versatility of some types of digital technologies. But we were then pressured in the review process to, well, is this really general, or is it just recent, and is it much more technologies than crisis that drive it? So that then we found examples for every crisis from the Great Depression and forward, right? And the digital technologies are not the only technologies that vary along how flexible, distributable, and expansible they are. So we saw that no, it is more general, and it will probably go for future crises as well. But maybe the rapid development of digital technologies will not be the same, but so it's more standard fare that everyone has equal access to all that. So that will not. I think it will still be this minority that can maneuver this better than others, and you can prepare for rapid scaling, right? You can also in the framework we built, we discuss a number of mechanisms that what can this crisis do for you, or what can this other environmental change do for you? Can it sort of can it reduce the need for resources? Can it allow you to offer a different product, a better product according to some, or a more effective business model? Will it boost demand for some of the things that you can do or you're currently doing, right? Can it help you to capture more of the value you create and so forth? So that it is sort of it's a conceptual toolbox for saying what can be in this crisis for us. So and we're trying to develop this also as a practitioner tool to be more accessible and attractive for practical application.
Mm. Well, I want to thank you very much for the conversation today, Per. I really like how we started with you talking to us about how you surfed the wave of change with the research that you did, and then finished up with a call to action for everyone to surf the wave of change in the next crisis. And I find that mindset of not being a victim of a crisis, but really finding opportunity, something that's very empowering.
Well, one I mentioned earlier, but would like to repeat, really consider turning to an acquisition growth strategy if you're inclined for growth, and then in crisis times, acquisition growth is, relatively speaking, more attractive than it is in booming times when there is more competition for all resources and less available for acquisition on the market as well.
Thank you. If people are interested in learning more about what you talked about in your presentation or what you covered today, what's the best way for them to reach out or to find out more?
Probably to go to our website, which has sort of a kind of a long name, but it's externalenablement.org. You're allowed to put in a hyphen there, or you're allowed to have the wrong what do you call it? The last three ones?
The suffix.
The suffix, yes. But the nominal name.
Or the top level, the top level domain.
Yeah, it's externalenablement.org, where we sort of collect, we explain the framework and its parts, and we post research that apply this, and some teaching and practice-oriented tools as well, although these are not yet as developed as the research side is, but there may be things of interest there. I think that would be a good entry point.
Fantastic.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Per. Thank you very much, Seb.
Okay, thank you.